thank you for your patience for the 3 seconds you had to wait for our number crunching. Really, we almost had a heart attack, though. We thought there was a problem with the formula, but don't worry. There was no problem. I don't know why my mind just blanked after that. There was no problem. So we're back in action.
I'm sorry.
You just stop laughing.
Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry.
All right, well, I'm going to start the whole thing over.
I'm sorry. You just kind of like stopped right there. That was it. It's just like, All right, we're good. We're good. I'm good. Hello, welcome to the Interstate Gamers Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin, aka K-Slugs.
My name is Peter, aka Deal For Real, and I'm also your host.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Interstate Gamers Podcast. Sorry, this episode is it came out a little bit later than usual. I'm having a lot of IRL life stuff happening right now, and personally, I don't think that's an excuse, but it's been pretty crazy, so I've tried my best to get this out and happening, but
you know what I like to say?
What?
It's not an excuse, it's a reason.
It's a reason. There you go.
So don't get at Kevin.
Don't get at me. The episode's here finally, and it's a really good game, a game that is from a popular franchise. Pete Boy, would you mind filling the audience in?
This game is a Game Boy Color game from the illustrious Legend of Zelda series, a game that I haven't heard too much about, even though it seems to have gotten a lot of acclaim. So you guys may or may not be hearing about it for the first time also. This is The Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Seasons.
Hell yeah, dude. Another Zelda game. Another one. You know, we can't finish the Interstate Gamers Podcast as an entirety without reviewing every single Zelda game.
Does that include the ones for the Philips CDI?
Yes, we will have to find a way to get our own copy and play it from the original console. But yeah, so this game, you're right, it has received a lot of acclaim for it, and that it's like, oh, people love this game. And I was like, man, I haven't heard too much about it. And so obviously I've never played it, even though I had a Game Boy Color, which kind of baffles me. But yeah, I was really excited to play this one and see what it's all about.
Yeah, me too. I haven't played really, I don't think, any handheld Zelda games, excluding the GBA port of Link to the Past that I have. But we're not going to count that, of course. So this game actually has a pretty interesting origin story. It came out in 2001, so that's after Ocarina of Time and after Majora's Mask even. The original idea was to remake the original NES Legend of Zelda for the Game Boy Color, but it kind of spiraled into this effort to make like some huge number of Game Boy games. Like I think the developers wanted to make like 5 or 6 Game Boy games all within a pretty short span of time.
Wow.
But then they were like, hey, this is kind of ridiculous. So they scaled it back to 3, which then got scaled back to 2. The other game that pairs with this is called Oracle of Ages. Now, if you're thinking that sounds like some Pokemon shit, you're actually not super correct. I mistakenly thought that it was kind of some Pokemon style, no real need to split it up. But they are 2 different games. And when you complete one of the games, it'll give you information that you can bring to the next game and then play through that and then get the true ending. Kevin and I have just played Oracle of Seasons. We may or may not play Oracle of Ages. Not right away, because we want to play some non-Zelda, obviously. Get that variete in there. But pretty interesting origin story. It was developed by Flagship, which is a subsidiary of Capcom. They may be defunct by this point, but Flagship also did some like Game Boy Kirby games and some other Game Boy Zelda games. So yeah, not strictly a Nintendo game in that sense, but still a game that was, as Kevin mentioned, very celebrated for its time.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun playing it. There were some frustrating times and some fun times. I want to know, Peter, did you play it on the actual Game Boy Color, or did you play it on an emulator, or how did you play this?
I played it on the emulator. I suppose I could have found a cartridge and played on my Game Boy Advance. However, I am spoiled to the ways of Game Boy emulation via my Wii, so I've been doing that. How did you play it?
Kind of similar to you in that it was emulated, but I emulated it on my SNES Mini. Don't know how that happened, but it did, and that was a pretty cool experience. Like you said, like having it big screen on a console, it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I had to keep in mind while playing it, this wasn't like the intended way to play the game. Like when I'm playing it on a SNES controller and like I'm looking at it, I'm like, this doesn't really look like a SNES game. It's because it wasn't. It was a Game Boy Color game. So I had I had to remind myself of that every now and then.
Yeah.
When thinking about it critically.
Yeah. So as far as, I'll just quickly cover kind of like the storyline, I suppose. Like other Zelda games, kind of from this style. I was about to say from this era, but of course, Ocarina and Majora's had very involved stories. This game keeps the story pretty simple to start off with. You rescue the goddess Din from a creature named Onox, who is kind of this generic dark general of evil. It turns out that Onox was created by some familiar characters who we'll talk about later. But he kidnaps Din, who is the titular Oracle of Seasons, and in doing so, he throws all the seasons in this world into disarray. The world of Holodrum, not Hyrule this time. And so you go about kind of rescuing the sort of fairies who contain elements of the different seasons, and you can use the seasons to slightly change the overworld and give yourself access to new paths, things like that. But aside from that kind of story concept, it's a pretty standard 2D Zelda game where you got the overworld and you have dungeons, and in this game you have 8 dungeons to go through, so it's a good length of game. Otherwise, it's a fairly traditional Zelda game, so I think when we start getting into the gameplay here, you Zelda fans may start noticing some things that you're familiar with.
Yeah. I really did enjoy the story, and I thought it was pretty unique. Kind of a little bit different from your traditional, like, Ganon this and Zelda that, and it's on a different world than Hyrule. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, for the most part, it still feels like a traditional Zelda.
Yeah. Having said this, are you ready to get into the gameplay?
For sure, man. Let me just jump right in, man. Get my scuba gear and dive right in.
Sploosh.
So, I guess the first thing I want to say is, I found the gameplay to be a little bit frustrating at times. I got wombo comboed a lot by enemies every now and then and would just like send me back to the beginning of a dungeon, and like, it was kind of annoying. But I think that was kind of if I'm not mistaken, that's kind of the point of Oracle of Seasons, is kind of to be like a more challenging combat style. I'm not sure.
I did read that the emphasis on Seasons was, testing your combat prowess, whereas Ages was more about testing your puzzle solving. Although this game did have some puzzles, for sure.
Yeah.
But that does make me interested in what Ages would have. But yeah, I agree. I also got myself wombo comboed a few times. And I think it has to do with how little invincibility you have after you're hit.
Yeah.
It doesn't really give you much of a chance to escape. So you do have to be on point with your shield and sword and other assortment of usual items.
Yeah, even though your shield doesn't really ever help much except for a few instances.
Yeah.
But I will say Unicorn's Cave Dungeon, that boss was super annoying. That's probably my least favorite boss, I think.
Can you remind me which one that is?
That's the one where you get the magnetic gloves and you have to like push the rock into the...
Oh, yeah.
That one was... Maybe you tried to forget that and block it out of your memory, but that was one of the most recent ones that I played. And yeah, that was pretty annoying. Purely just because the way the mechanics worked, and I just don't think... Yeah, it wasn't fun. But there were just a lot of little annoying things like that with the gameplay. Nothing too major. I also found myself getting lost or not having a clear sense of direction and where I was supposed to go or what I was supposed to do. I did have my text on the fastest setting, so maybe that there was times where I looked up or I just sped through something and they clearly told me where to go. But I feel like, having something to refer back to on where you're supposed to go would make it feel a little bit better. But yeah, I got lost a lot. And so eventually I had to start like looking up a guide because like I have to finish this game. Yeah. I think it would be more fun if like you had time to explore the whole world. And I think that's kind of the point. Whereas like you have a Game Boy Color, you don't want the game to be over really fast because back in those days, it's like you didn't have a ton of options, especially Zelda games on the Game Boy Color. So you're like, all right, I want to spend my time exploring this world. And I think that's what the developers wanted. But for me, you know, perhaps trying to speed through this game, not necessarily speed, but go through it a little bit faster than probably was intended. It was a little frustrating to be like, where am I going?
Yeah, I felt the same way at times. And I tried to hold off on the save states for as long as I could, but towards the end of it, I did start, some would say, abusing save states because I wanted to save time and also save states. That kind of comes with the territory of us doing this podcast, is that we do have to manage our time if we want to complete a game or play through most of it to record it. I did start getting a little frustrated by the end of the game. There are some things that are kind of like fetch quests that you have to go on in order to progress, and I found that to be a little bit of a waste of time. Some of the characters involved were fun characters, and the settings were interesting, but just the tedium of having to do the thing before the next dungeon was kind of starting to get to me. But, you know, if I were a younger kid, which was the game's target audience, and I had more time, then I wouldn't have minded, you know? So it's important to keep that stuff in mind, too.
For example, there's a point where you have to get access to some item that's imperative to your quest. I can't exactly remember what it is, but you have to push these 4 like statues together and then get it in the middle of them and like swing your sword in a circle, like charge your sword and swing it in a circle. And then that's how you get the item. It's like, how would I ever know to do that? And my guess is like you have to go and talk to somebody, some random person in the world that would tell you that. But it's just kind of like, it doesn't seem like there's very clear path a lot of times.
I think that one might kind of be your fault because there's like that particular situation. There's a guy who tells you like, go to this cave, and he doesn't tell you exactly like swing your sword at the same time to hit all the statues, but he tells you something like pretty close to that.
Right.
So it may have been a case of you just not paying attention in that particular moment.
Right. Well, that's kind of my point though, right? It's like, you know, I seem to be just talking to some random villager or something like that. And it's like, I go and I get to this moment in time and like, what do I do? And I guess the point is to like go back and like actually talk and listen to these people, but I don't have time for that.
I think the worst offender that I found as far as not having clear direction was, I think it's before the 6th dungeon, the Ancient Ruins. There is a set of 4 gems that you have to collect and place into these little slots. Yeah. And the gems are hidden like in random little caves all over the world. They're not anywhere near this place. And I may have sped through text or something, but I do not remember a single soul on the face of the earth telling me that I had to do that. And I found the first gem like on accident somehow, which, you know, was lucky, I guess, because it turns out I needed it. But it didn't tell me like, oh, you found the thing, this will be important. It said, like, this is from a bygone era. I was like, okay, so maybe I don't have to worry about it. And then later I come to this, the entrance to this dungeon that has the 4 holes in it for the gems to go. Right. And so then I Google it and like, okay, I have to go like to this corner of the earth and this one and that one. I was like, how the hell was I supposed to know how to do this?
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, there's something to be said for exploration, but like no one ever said anything about this as far as I remember. And I feel like I'm pretty good at paying attention to stuff like that. So I was kind of disappointed and frustrated.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. There is, so did you ever get the members card?
I did, yeah.
So when you get the members card, you can get that treasure map that's in the store. And that treasure map like shows you where all of the shapes are.
Oh, really? I may have found the members card after that or something.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but the gist of it is there's a lot of situations like that where you're like, how would I ever know? And I think it involves a lot of exploration of the world, like in detail. And yeah, like you said, if we had more time, that'd be ideal. But I guess maybe the point here is like, if you're just hoping for a casual playthrough, maybe it's not going to turn out that way.
Yeah. I do want to talk about the items in the game because I felt that there were some really interesting additions to the usual boomerang and bombs and all that stuff.
Right.
Probably the most revolutionary item was the feather that you get somewhere kind of near the beginning of the game that allows you to just straight up jump over stuff.
Right.
And after you get that item, a lot of the challenges become more like platforming challenges, which for me felt very unlike a Zelda game, but in a pretty interesting way. I kind of welcomed the change into these more platforming elements. And it also allows you to just like jump over enemies, which can be very helpful at times to avoid getting wombo comboed, as you put it. But it was interesting. And there's also some side-scrolling sections in the dungeons, as well as the overworld sometimes, which I think is kind of a comeback from like Zelda 1 or Zelda 2. But those sections also felt like an interesting fusion of Zelda and Mario in a way that I hadn't really felt too much in a Zelda game before. So I found that item in particular kind of added a new dimension to the gameplay that I enjoyed.
Yeah, those are like Zelda 2 and what's the one that just was remade for the Switch?
Link's Awakening.
Link's Awakening, yeah. Link's Awakening has that. I feel like in those games it was implemented a little bit better. But it is definitely, I like the jumping. I wish there were more games that involve Link jumping.
Well, good news. We have Breath of the Wild, brand new Zelda game, which involves jumping.
Exactly, yeah. Good news there.
I do wish it was faster to switch between items, though, because you switch between items a lot, and you have to like wait for the screen to fade out and the menu to come back. And I was like, man, I wish this was just instant. It would make it so much faster.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I also wrote down. Switching between two items and or weapons that got old and annoying real fast, and it seemed very frequent. Like, I think it's fun to incorporate all the items. Don't get me wrong. Like, I really like that about the dungeons. But it seemed like a little too frequent where like in the same area, I'd have to go from one item to the next. Maybe it's not that drastic, but it felt like that way. It was just like a lot of times I was switching between items.
Yeah. I swear I feel like maybe 1/5 of the total playtime is like switching items.
Yeah.
I love the magnet item though, the magnet gloves. When I first got that, I was like, "Ooh, this is really cool. It lets you zip across gaps and maneuver blocks." And like there's some items, or there's some elements in some dungeons that like spin around over a pit, and you can attach yourself to them and you'll kind of spin around with the item, and then you can push off and go somewhere else. It's like, this is really cool. I love that item.
Yeah, that item's really cool. I was worried like when I got the item and I was using it within the dungeon, I'm like, this is cool and all, but I have a feeling that I'm going to use it to like face off against the boss, and I'm hoping that it won't be like some weird implementation. And sure enough, it was a very weird, like you have to push the spiky ball into the enemy or the boss. And like, that was really hard. And he gets faster and he like jumps over stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. I was happy to have save states for that one.
Yeah. I think I figured out a glitch to where if he's not on screen, he's like, he doesn't move as much or something along those lines, because I would go like off to the side and he would like, I was able to wombo combo him. I was like, okay, this is cool. That's how I beat him. It was kind of interesting. But anyway, I kind of want to talk about some more of the positive things. I feel like we've just been railing on this game, but it really wasn't too bad in terms of gameplay. It felt like a top-down, Zelda game, which is always fun. I love the incorporation of the animals and using their different abilities. Ricky was sick. I love Ricky. Dimitri was a cutie. I love Dimitri. The little dinosaur, the Triceratops, and Ricky is a kangaroo. Probably Ricky is probably my favorite. And then I got the bear that could fly with the wings.
Moosh is his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got Moosh as well.
Moosh is pretty cool. So are those optional, do you know, or do you like have to get some of them?
You have to choose one of the three, and that one will become your companion for the whole story. But like there are certain points in time where you have to use all three of them, but only one of them will become your bae, so to speak.
Oh, I see. So the horn that you get can only call one of them.
Yeah. And so it sounds like you and I both kind of naturally ending up with Moosh's horn, which is interesting because I wonder how you would play differently to end up with one of the other two.
Actually, wait, I got Ricky.
You got the kangaroo.
Yeah. Ricky, he was like, I didn't know it worked like that. So Ricky, he was the one I got with the horn.
Yeah. But I thought they were neat. I thought they were a really cute addition. They're not the same as Epona, but still pretty cool.
Well, it felt more like a Banjo-Kazooie kind of transformation kind of thing. Not exactly, because you're not transforming to anything, but you get like new abilities.
Yeah.
I thought that was I always like doing that, because like even if they're like temporary abilities, I think that's like a cool way to play games.
Yeah.
I didn't care too much for the rings, like getting them appraised. I felt like that was a big emphasis they tried to put, and I found myself super uninterested in like collecting a bunch of rings. And furthermore, I didn't really understand exactly how it worked.
The way that rings work is that you find a ring somewhere on the overworld, and you have to go to Horon Town, where you start the game, to get them appraised by a certain person. And after he appraises them, he can add it to your box. And you have a box that you carry with you that can hold like 1 to 3 rings, I think, depending on where you are in the game. And at any point in time, you can switch between which of those rings you're wearing, but you can only carry those with you at a time. So like if you want to change one of your 3 rings so you have another option available, you have to go back to the town and have the dude like change your thing. And I think it's a cool idea. They certainly did try to sell it really hard.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the rings that I ended up finding seemed pretty inconsequential. There was one that was kind of cool that made the game harder. Like it made you take twice as much damage and your sword do half as much damage. Which if you're like an expert, then yeah, go for it. That's pretty cool that they give you the option to do that. I couldn't imagine doing that because I found the game fairly difficult towards the end.
Right.
But yeah, they were neat, I think, but they weren't really of much importance, I don't think.
Right. I agree. Yeah. One thing I also really, really liked was the side quests. Like I always love having side quests in a game, and as long as they're like they mean something and you can get cool rewards from them, I feel like, definitely put them in your game. And I think this game did a really good job with them. I know there were a lot of them that were like not super necessary, or like, you didn't really have to do them, and they're not, that you don't get a big reward. But some of them were like, pretty huge, in that you could increase the size of your bomb bag or your like seed bag or whatever.
Yeah.
Seed satchel, I think that's what they called it. And so, I really liked all the side quests in this game.
There's also a trading game to upgrade your sword, kind of like an ocarina, but I never found the starting point for it, but I found like all of the people along the way who said, oh, if only I had a fish, or if only I had a sweater or something. And it's like, I know what to do, but where do I start? I never quite found that out.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. But just having all these different things that you're able to do kind of alongside the main quests to really just enhance the game's, I guess, content, but just really having more to do is cool.
Yeah, I mean, you completing the side quests gives you more improved gameplay because it'll, increase your bomb count or what have you. So you do get rewards for doing it aside from just playing more game.
Right.
So we mentioned the season mechanic where you can change the seasons. And for example, you start off only having access to winter, which means that if you're in an area that isn't winter, you can go to a designated tree stump and then swing your season rod, and then it'll change to winter. And during the course of the game, you get access to more seasons, which is helpful because some elements of the environment can only be passed through or passed over or whatever in certain seasons. So like there are mushrooms that grow in various spots, but you can only pick them in the fall. So if it's not fall, it's a roadblock. I found that to be a pretty cool mechanic. It was interesting. It gave an interesting puzzle aspect at times because there are some areas where like you have to find the stump where you can change the season, and then you have to like navigate from there to the place where you need to do the thing. And there's like one part of the game that is very, very like, this is the season puzzle part, which was kind of interesting. But I'm curious what you thought of that mechanic overall.
Yeah, I really liked the season mechanic. I actually can't believe I forgot to mention it. I found that to be pretty cool. Like you have to go to the same parts of the world, but like, it changes, the environment changes, and you have access to different things. So I definitely think that's cool. It's a good way to utilize the space that you have.
Yeah.
For sure. And, be creative with it. So yeah, I found that to be pretty cool. It gave like you said, like a bit of a puzzle to it. And I'm kind of worried because if this is not supposed to be the puzzle oriented game and the next one is, I found some of the puzzles to be pretty hard in this one. So I'm hoping that the ages isn't like I'm not stuck for hours.
Yeah, I feel the same way, so I'm glad that we both have that opinion. The last point I have on gameplay is the alternate realm of Subrosia, which you discover fairly early in the game. It's kind of like the Dark World equivalent in this game. It's kind of like underground, sort of. It's never clear if it's underground or not, but there's a lot of lava everywhere and volcanoes, and all the Subrosians who live there are these hooded figures, and you can just see their glowing eyes. But they're kind of cute. They have some fun personalities to them. And during the course of the game, you will find yourself traveling back and forth between the overworld and Subrosia. And I liked the integration of that. It felt a little more creative than, say, Link to the Past, where it's like the same map, but one is light and one's dark for the most part. Subrosia felt a little more interesting and more different. And plus, I enjoyed some of the characters that I met there, which I guess I'll talk about in content when I talk more about like the personality of the game.
Right.
It didn't feel like the overworld, really. It felt like its own unique place, and I enjoyed that. Right,
yeah, that's what I was going to say. I love Subrosia. It was a nice change of pace in that, like, you know, you go there, and when you know that you're supposed to go there next, right? So then you go there, and you're like, I love this place. And so you're like, wonder where I need to go to figure this one thing out. And it was more of a puzzle, like, oriented thing, whereas, like, most of the game felt like a really fast-paced combat-oriented stuff. So, and usually you go there after a dungeon. Yeah. So it's really nice change of pace after a dungeon. I thought they implemented that very well. And like you said, it felt like its own unique place. It even had its own currency.
Yeah, that's true.
So that was pretty cool. And the characters, as you said, they're pretty dope. So yeah, I agree.
Cool, man. That's all I got for this section.
Same. Why don't we give our ratings for it? Let's see. I'll start out and I will give it an 83.
Damn, I gave it an 85.
85. So we're pretty close. I was wondering how we would match up on that one. I wasn't sure, but I'm glad to see, as usual, that we are pretty similar in our viewpoints.
Yeah, we may have kind of railed on a few aspects of the gameplay, but really, there's nothing about the game that is bad, I would say, or gameplay, at least, that is bad. I think a lot of our complaints are just kind of like, games from back in the day tend to have these things about them that don't translate well to like working adults trying to play them. It's really kind of the gist of it.
Yeah. I guess there wasn't much of a market for, adults trying to play them back in the day.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on to everyone's favorite section, aesthetics. So we'll start out with the visuales. Pete Boy, why don't you take us off?
Heck yeah, buddy. I really like the visuals. I think the very first comment I wrote down was, fun fact, I took notes on my phone while playing the game. However, I did translate the most important notes to paper, so I'm still, I found a way to make it analog again. But the very first note I took while I was playing was that the artwork during the cutscenes is really, really beautiful, I found. Just really charming, detailed artwork for those cutscenes. And I found the rest of the game to be visually pleasing as well. The changing of seasons adds some nice visual variety for sure.
Right.
You've got the cool tones and then the warm tones as the seasons change. The sprites and the environments are nicely detailed. It really just felt like a quality visual game that I'd expect from the Legend of Zelda series overall.
Yeah, I think that's something that I wrote down too. Is like. The visuals were pretty good for a Game Boy Color game, especially. And, as you'd expect from a Zelda game, you're going to have a good looking game. It definitely didn't fall short there. I wouldn't say it's like the flashiest game nowadays or like it hasn't aged particularly well. But again, you have to think about the console that this game was made for. And at the time, like what did these graphics look like to someone? And, especially to have these kind of graphics on the go, which was like an even bigger deal.
Yeah.
So, I think the time frame of this game is definitely important. Some of the visual effects and animations were also pretty good. I don't know exactly. I can't give any specific examples, but, I was really impressed what they were able to do given the limited technology of the Game Boy Color.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quite impressive, really.
I felt that each dungeon felt very different visually. Like they made good use of colors and patterns and stuff to make them feel like their own dungeons, which I appreciated faux show. They also, many of the dungeon maps, I don't know if all of them do this, but at least several of them, they're shaped like an object. So Unicorn Cave is shaped like a unicorn, and the final dungeon, which is Sword and Shield Dungeon, shouts to Pokemon, is shaped like a sword and a shield, and that's pretty cool too.
That is awesome. I didn't know it was called Sword and Shield Dungeon.
Yeah.
Like all the different effects that with all your different items, like the Rod of Seasons, or the visual effects with like with the magnetic gloves and things like that. They had a lot of cool animations and sounds too, but we'll get to those. But really an on-point game. But yeah, like I said, I don't know that it's aged particularly well. Like you think about handheld games today and you have the Switch, which is like, oh my gosh, we're able to do this.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to compare that versus the Game Boy Color, but just kind of trying to think about it objectively. I'm like, okay, this is a good looking game for its time, but I don't know that I could say nowadays I'd be like, yeah, that's a really beautiful game.
Yeah. Well, I'd say it's still charming. Like,
yeah,
as long as you know what to expect, I think you're going to be pleased.
True.
I was impressed that while I was playing the game, there were only 2 or 3 points where I ever felt any sort of lag or slowdown. Just a couple of rooms and a couple of dungeons where there was a lot of enemies on the screen. But again, that only happened like twice in the 15 plus hours I was playing the game. So I was pretty happy with that too.
Right. And then I think there were some instances where like character sprites were like kind of cut off a little bit in my experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't the lag. I didn't really ever feel it, to be honest.
Yeah. Very technically sound.
For sure. Well, that's really all I have to say about the visuals without kind of repeating myself.
I have one little nitpick. I think this is the only negative point I have, really, is that some of the items in the inventory look pretty similar at first glance. I found myself confusing the power bracer with the boomerang because they were both kind of like crescent-shaped yellow things. So I'd like put one on and like, oh shit, this is an item.
Yes.
And
I had that problem too.
And there were a bunch of items that were kind of like blue vertical shapes, a lot of blue items for whatever reason. And I would sometimes put on the wrong one of those. And I think maybe they could have found a way to make the items look a little more distinct, but that's kind of a nitpick, as I said.
Right. Yeah, the resolution on the Game Boy Color is also pretty low.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I agree. Why don't you give your ratings for the visuals if you're done?
I will, with pleasure. I gave visuals a 95.
95. Nice. I think we differed a little bit here. I went with an 85, so I'm a little bit lower on the scale.
Ooh, ouch.
Ouch.
My graphic bones.
Your graphic bones. Yeah. I couldn't really say, kind of comparing the other games that we've rated and things like that. I kind of looked at it and I was like, well, this game is really good, and I definitely think it's good for its time, but I don't know that I could say that it's aged super well. So that's really kind of with my non-technical view of visuals. But you are the graphic artist, so maybe I'm more incorrect than you are.
No, I don't think you're incorrect, and I don't think I'm correct. I think we're both having our own opinions. But I did definitely value the aesthetic of it. Just because I have a lot of appreciation for the pixel art and for what they were able to do with the technology they had. So I think that kind of informed my viewpoint a lot.
Oh, yeah. One thing I did say mention was that it was good, and I know they're different consoles, but I felt like Link to the Past was a lot better with like pixel art and things like that. And I know the resolution's different, and definitely the SNES was a much more powerful console than the Game Boy Color. But it's just kind of weird to think that like Link to the Past, an older game, is better looking than.
Yeah, that game came out like 9 years before this one too.
Exactly. Yeah, it's because that was kind of my thing, but really a small thing. And 85 is a good score, so I'm not fretting over it.
I'm pretty surprised that that's the first time that we've compared this game to Link to the Past, because it's like a really obvious comparison. And honestly, there's a lot of comparisons we could make, but I think we're trying to keep it to minimum so it doesn't become the Link to the Past show.
Yeah. So moving on to audio, I'll start off. I'll say that these songs were pretty fire, especially for a Game Boy Color chiptune soundtrack. I was pretty impressed. However, if you leave the game on one screen for too long, or like one area, you could start to get annoyed due to the short looping nature of all the songs.
Yeah.
But I thought the songs were pretty good, especially like, they're the songs that you know and love, but in like chiptune, which is really nice to hear. Like when I first opened the game, I was like, oh yeah, here we go.
That's my stuff.
That's my shit.
It's interesting you feel that way, because I was a little bit disappointed by the music, actually. What I did appreciate is that every dungeon had its own music, which is unlike Link to the Past. That's a definite improvement, I think. But for the most part, I found the music to be not as engaging, or not as interesting, maybe, as some other Zelda music that I've heard and loved over the years. I will say that an exception to that was the music in the Lost Woods equivalent of this game. I found that music to be very good. It's not the same Lost Woods music that a lot of us know. It's not Saria's song. It's a new original tune. At least I think it's new. I haven't played every Zelda game, so maybe they reused it. But that track stood out to me as a highlight. I also liked how they kind of reworked the main Hyrule theme. They added like a new section to it, so it's not the same old. I thought that was pretty cool. It was funny because as I was playing the game, I thought, this doesn't sound like Koji Kondo to me. And then looking at the credits, turns out it's not Koji Kondo, as expected. So interesting that I, as a non-professional musician, was able to put that together.
Yeah, our boy Koji, he got kind of shorted. There was actually, at one point, Katie and I, we kind of paused the game and we started breaking down dancing to one of the dungeon themes. I kid you not, we came up with a legit dance for it. I think it was Dungeon 4. It was super fire.
I remember one of them in particular being like straight fire. Yeah. And I was like, okay, this one I do dig. But not everyone.
It's the one where it goes, it's like a waiver. I don't know how to explain it, but I think if you go home and you Google Dungeon 4 Oracle of Seasons, I think you'll know what I'm talking about. The sound effects, if I could get into those are pretty important to me. I found those to be pretty, they were cool, but overall they were kind of meh. Yeah. The only thing that really stood out was, releasing of the dam of the water where it just goes,
yeah, that was
or
neat.
The volcanoes or anything where the earth shook and started to rumble. I felt like they had a pretty good sound effect for that. So, otherwise, pretty lackluster sound effects.
I pretty much agree. I don't know if I'd call them lackluster, but they weren't like too special generally. I did like the sound effect whenever you changed the season to go like dee, 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 or something like that. It was very nice and bright and crisp sounding. The beeping for low health is as annoying as it always has been. So I don't know at what point they changed it, but it was definitely after this point.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a point where I was in a dungeon and I was kind of struggling, and I definitely just muted the TV because I was like, I can't deal with this right now.
I would either kill myself or go out of my way to find another heart. I would turn over every pot. I was like, please, give me more hearts.
It gives you the sense of urgency required to motivate you to get your health back, but it's very annoying.
It makes me go insane.
I kind of wanted to mention this when we were talking about dungeon music, but there is the very final dungeon in the game has an interesting song where it starts off with this kind of slow, dun, 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 kind of whatever. But then for some reason, the music just kind of stops, and then you hear a for 20 seconds, and then it loops over. And I'm like, what do these two pieces of the song have to do with each other? They sound like totally random things. And at first, I kind of dug it. But then I was like, all right, I've been in this dungeon for an hour and a half. I'm really over this crazy ascending synth line thing.
Yeah. They did a lot of those where they kind of just went out there.
Yeah.
I like the attempt, but I think, like I said, due to the short looping nature of them, they can start to get annoying after a while.
Yeah.
But overall, I really enjoyed the soundtrack. I thought their implementations of songs that pre-existed this game were pretty good, and then also some of their new songs were pretty fire. But there were some songs that weren't that great, but overall I liked it.
They did bring back the Song of Storms for one little point.
Yeah,
so for you Song of Storms fans out there, I know that you're such a fan, Kevin. You will be entranced by the version that they have in this game.
Mm-hmm, for sure. I felt like there was a lot of Ocarina of Time flavor in this game.
Yeah, I'll get to that in content actually, because it's kind of interesting how they approach that and how Oracle of Ages approached that from what I read.
Ooh, can't wait. Well, I'm done with audio, honestly.
Yeah, me too. We won't have to wait too long for content, as it turns out.
So, you give your score. What'd you get?
I gave it an AT.
An AT. Cool. I gave it a 90. So, I guess our scores will meet in the middle there, and it'll be 85 for audio. But that's not how we do things, so it won't be that way. But if we did do it that way...
Welcome to the hypothetical gamers.
Oh man, but cool. Yeah, I could see our scores being like that. Moving on to content. Why don't you get started? Because I've heard so much about what you wanted to, some of the things you might be talking about. So I want to know.
So apparently this game has a lot of elements that pay homage to Ocarina of Time. One example of that, of course, is the Song of Storms' little windmill appearance that is in a kind of an early area of the game. You'll find the guy in the windmill. But also the big tree spirit dude is like very obviously similar to the Deku tree.
Right.
But apparently what's interesting is that Oracle of Ages pays similar homage to Majora's Mask instead of Ocarina of Time.
Whoa.
That makes me interested to play that at some point and see what there is to see there.
Yeah, that's going to be freaking awesome. I can't wait.
Yeah. So the game's content is a decently long game, I would say, for a Game Boy Color game. HowLongToBeat.com, which is my favorite website, gives an average of like 15 hours for the main game. I think I played a little more than that, but not too much more. 8 dungeons, and you have the overworld and Sub-Rosa things to do in between that. So it definitely paces it out to where it's like dungeon for some amount of time and then overworld dungeon.
Right.
And it doesn't really like crowd the dungeons together ever, which I think is sometimes frustrating if you're like, I need to beat the game, I need to get through the dungeons,
Yeah.
But otherwise it's a nice pacing, I think.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I didn't even think about the pacing, but that is definitely a good point. I think the content is where this game kind of shines best. Again, to have this amount of content on the go with you during this era of gaming was kind of unheard of.
Yeah.
You think about like having, like back in the day, like, just having an adventure game and how long those typically took and how much content there typically was in those games. And you couldn't say that anything this extensive was there in those games. And so I think this game does really good job of like having a bunch of side quests, having a bunch of exploration, lots of things that you can do and get lost in the world and things like that. It really felt like this huge world. It wasn't super huge. Like it's not like Breath of the Wild, but they made it work for the Game Boy Color. And I think that's something to be said. Almost, I kind of wish I had this game because it seems like it's a must own for the Game Boy Color era and I didn't have it. So I'm kind of bummed that I didn't experience this in my childhood to where I would have enough time to get lost in the world and like talk to everyone and do every little thing. So I think the content's done very well.
Your comment just now made me think maybe we shouldn't review Oracle of Ages for the show. Maybe we should just play it on our own time and kind of get like the more authentic, less rushed Game Boy Color experience.
Yeah, or maybe take more time. Maybe like next season, like where we already have it done or something.
Yeah. So I mentioned a little earlier the callbacks to Ocarina of Time, and although I do find them kind of charming because, of course, I do enjoy Ocarina of Time, there were some points where to me it felt a little bit lazy, depending on like what mood I was in. For example, I think really what I'm talking about is like mostly one example, which is that at the end of the game you find out that the Dark General Onox, who has been the antagonist the whole time, it turns out that he was summoned by Twin Rova, which are the 2 witches from Ocarina of Time, like the Gerudo witches who kidnapped Naboru and all this stuff. Those 2 witches were like Ganon's parents or like his mentors or something. So they have, a a vested interest in keeping Ganon and Ganondorf in the picture. So they're the ones who summoned Onyx and sicked him on this world. And then when you play Oracle of Ages, you find out that they were also behind the villain in that game as well, I believe, if I'm remembering my research correctly. But the point is, like, when you link the two games and you're like going towards the true ending, you actually do like fight Ganon at the end, and he does something involving Zelda. And I was a little disappointed when I found that out, because I was kind of ready to enjoy like a non-Ganon game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes they do that. Like a bunch of the handheld games have some sort of element where Ganon isn't the main villain, at least to my knowledge. I haven't really played them much myself.
Link's Awakening.
Yeah, Link's Awakening is an example, and so is Minish Cap, I believe. But anyway, I was a little disappointed that it was Ganon the whole time, you know? Like,
yeah. So how do these two games connect? Do you know? Because I don't exactly know. Like, how, like, do they take place at the same time, or?
So I don't know about the whole timeline thing. I can say that in Oracle of Ages, you do travel back and forth in time, kind of like Ocarina and kind of like Link to the Past.
Right.
But as far as like which one happens first, I don't know. But the way that they actually connect in the real world is that when you complete one game, you get like some sort of secret code that you're supposed to write down. And then I think when you start the next game, you may have an option to give that code somewhere. I don't remember if I had a prompt to do that when I started this game. So I don't know exactly how that happens, but you can enter this code in the other game once you've completed the first one. And then like some of your items and stuff will be brought over to the new game.
Whoa.
So I guess like, you know, each character in the code stands for like a certain item or however it works. You know, password systems like that had been around for a long time, so it wasn't really anything new. When you had that information and you put it into the second game, then like it would put you on the path to get the true ending when you beat that game, I think. I'm not too sure. Like, I don't think you have to jump back and forth between the two games. I think like one of them is just the sequel to the other one.
Right.
But it seems really interesting, actually, and I wouldn't mind like, you know, maybe watching a video of how that plays out or something like that.
Yeah, that is interesting. That kind of just adds to the content a little bit, I think. So
yeah,
cool. Yeah, there's a lot of things like that. Like, I think that's what makes this. I don't know what to call them, a series or what, but like to kind of rate them both together and give them kudos in this way is that they do connect to another game. It's like the sibling game in a sense.
Yeah.
So you could not only could you have a ton of fun playing one of them and getting immersed in that world, but you could play another one and get immersed in that world. So it just kind of enhances the replayability, I think. Maybe not in the sense of like the same game itself, but you could play, you know, seasons, and then you could play ages, and then you could replay them both or in a different order in some different way. I think that's really cool. I think how they implemented that, especially back in the day, is just really incredible.
Yeah, it makes them literally more than the sum of their parts.
Yeah, and it feels unique. Like, I don't think this happened any other point in the Zelda franchise. I could be wrong. Isn't there like maybe there's a different one that also incorporates multiple games?
I'm not too sure. Maybe like a Four Swords sort of thing. That kind of sounds like maybe what that was, but I don't know too much about that. But yeah, definitely props for the technical aspect and the expanding of content. It's always appreciated. The last note that I have on content, and I mentioned this briefly near the beginning, is I think the game has a nice personality and sense of humor about it. The Subrosians in particular, there's a bunch of them who are kind of funny. At one point, you go on a date with a celebrity Subrosian named Rosa, who has like a key. Like, she has like some sort of skeleton key that she carries around. So basically, you tell her you want to go on a date, and she gets all excited. And then you walk around the world. Like, she just follows you everywhere. And you just go to some door, and since you have Rosa with you, she opens it. But otherwise, there's like nothing date about it. It's just like the way that the game justifies having Rosa follow you around.
Right.
But it's really funny, and there's other characters who are jealous. There's a bunch of Subrosians in the area around Rosa that'll tell you, like, oh, I want to go on a date with her. And then one of them, when you actually have Rosa with you, he's like, what? How did you get a date with her? He's like all mad.
Yeah.
What's also funny is there's a pair of Subrosians who are they're blacksmiths, and you don't really talk to them, or you don't get them to do anything for you until pretty late in the game. there's one point where they're like, oh, the master says he can take your sword and make it fine. What would you like to do? And it gives you the options, make it fine, and then do whatever. And if you click make it fine, he says, what's like, how could you be so presumptuous as to want like a luxurious sword? You should be happy with what you have or whatever. But it's like, it's totally not what you expect. And so if you do the thing again and you say do whatever, he's like, I like the sound of that. Master, he says to do whatever. And then the master gives you like the upgraded sword.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It does have its own little personal flavor. That's one thing. You could actually go on a date with Rosa twice if you fancy.
Yeah. There was also, there is a guy in Subrosia who will like keep track of how many signs you've destroyed.
Oh, yeah.
And if you destroy a bunch, then he gets really mad at you. And it turns out that if you destroy 100 signs, he'll say, you have to pay the consequences. And then it looks like the game resets, but it just takes you back to that guy. And he's like, I hope you learned your lesson. Which is pretty funny. I didn't even know you could destroy signs. It turns out you just like pick them up, but you can't like slash them or anything. But speaking of signs, another thing I found really funny, which might not be intended to be funny, is that if you're like to the side of a sign or behind it and you try to read it, it'll say, you can't read it from there. It's like, what other game has done this? I've never seen a game that like tells you that you can't read a sign from there.
I feel like I've played some, but yeah, not many. For sure. Yeah, I ran into that problem too. And then I did hear about the sign thing because actually Katie was telling it while we were playing. And I was like, oh my gosh, really? And she's like, yeah, so don't talk to that guy. There's another guy that like, you go into the hole that he's living in, some cave, and you're like, oh, hey dude, what's up? And he's like, you aren't supposed to be down there. You destroyed my door. And he takes like 100 or 200 of your coins. You're just like, what the hell?
Yeah, it's crazy because some of them are like, oh, please don't tell anyone I'm here. And then they give you money. And then other ones are like,
yeah,
I'll thank you to pay for my door. And then they take your money. And like, it makes it really a gamble whether you go down there or not.
I don't know if I want to talk to this guy.
So yeah, pretty funny game.
Yeah. Point in case that the content was pretty good, I'd have to say.
Yeah.
So much so that I'm ready to give my score. I gave this one a 93.
Nice. I gave mine an 85.
An 85.
Yeah, I think maybe like the callbacks to Ocarina, as I said, they felt a little lazy to me at times, even if they were interesting. And I know it's not necessarily fair to compare this to Link to the Past because they're different systems and the SNES was more powerful, but when I was playing it, I was kind of like, man, there isn't nearly as much stuff to do as there is in Link to the Past.
Right.
Like, I kind of couldn't help but feel that. And I think to someone who is going back to, like, these 2D Zelda games today, it's kind of hard to recommend this game over Link to the Past.
Right.
But if you want to play both games, and they're both different and they have something slightly different to offer. So,
yeah.
It's certainly not bad content, but it just isn't as good as some other examples that I would also want to play.
Yeah, and if you know that and you're thinking like, oh, I could play Link to the Past, and then you actually get through one of these games, you might be like, well, I don't know if I want to go back through that again because I could play Link to the Past again. Yeah. So it's kind of like, but I get what you're saying. I still tried to rate this game fairly in that it was kind of like a handheld Legend of Zelda game, but maybe I gave it too many points for that. But I think I'll stick by my score.
Yeah, I don't think you gave it too many points. I think it's just different viewpoints,
Right. I can't say that I'm like in love with this game, but I wanted to try to rate it objectively, which is one thing I try to always do. And I know this game is viewed highly, so I didn't want to rate it just because other people said it was highly, but I can see where people would like this game and I can see the areas, but gameplay is not one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's not bad, but it's not the best game I've ever played. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, but still enjoyable. We both had a good time, sounds like.
For sure. With that said, let's do some number crunching.
Let's do it. All right, guys, we are back. Thank you for your patience. I know you had to wait for 3 long seconds or so, but we are ready to give you our scores and the final IG score. But first, we got to do the recap, and I will start as usual. I gave gameplay an 85, visuals a 95, audio an 80. So my average for the aesthetics portion is an 87.5, and content I gave an 85. So my categories are all kind of in similar areas, turns out. My overall rating is 85.8.
Nice. I think I'm pretty close to that in that I gave gameplay an 83, visuals an 85, audio a 90, which makes my aesthetics score an 87.5 as well. And my content was a 93, which makes my overall score an 87.8. So we're not too far from each other on there.
Yeah, we're only like 2 points away from each other exactly.
Yeah. So, of course, our IG score is going to be an 86.8, putting it 21st in the list of 34 games.
And it shares that spot with one other game, right?
Right, yeah. It shares it with Rocket League, which is kind of funny to think about nowadays because we play so much Rocket League. I can't see myself playing Oracle Seasons as much as I do Rocket League, but I think that's for different reasons.
Yeah, we definitely rated Rocket League before we really got into it. So
that's true too. Yeah, interesting though. It's kind of like a midway game for what we have now. Definitely still a good game. I wouldn't say it's bad by any means, and I do think someone could really really like this game a lot. Like there's definitely people out there who are like, oh, I love Oracle Seasons and Ages and stuff like that. I could see that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that we had that exact experience, but I could definitely envision someone being really hyped about this game.
Yeah. I want to be clear. I still really enjoyed it. I do wish I could play it without the time constraint, but we do have a Oracle of Ages to potentially do that with, TBD. But yeah, I was very charmed by this game, and I could certainly see it being a knockout when it first came on the scene in 2001.
For sure.
For sure. Especially with all the content, as you said, for the handheld aspect. But yeah, I would recommend this game to Zelda fans out there, fans of the 2D Zeldas. And I'd be curious to hear from our avid fans if any of them have played this game before, just because I was a little surprised how little I hear about it nowadays, considering how good it apparently was when it first came out.
Yeah, for sure. If you play this game, let us know your thoughts. And really that kind of goes with every game that we review. We kind of want to know, like, how you view the game. I know last episode when we reviewed Brawl, like Dolphin Dasher gave us a little bit of his thoughts and how he would rank Super Smash Bros. Brawl. And so I kind of want to see that from like some of our avid fans of like, how would you rank this game if you played it? So yeah, that'd be really interesting to hear from you guys.
Yeah, and a great way to hear from you guys actually would be on our Twitter. That'd probably be the best way. If you go to the IG_cast on Twitter, you'll find us there with all of our thoughts. And we will, well, I didn't really have anything else to say there. We will be there. That's what we'll be. We also have an Instagram. Kev, do you want to talk about the Instagram a little bit?
We do have an Instagram, and it's ran by my lovely wife, Dave. She runs the Instagram, and she kind of does a little posting for us. I think she teased this episode a little bit by posting a picture of a Game Boy Color. So
nice.
You can find us at the IG Cast, all one thing.
Yeah.
You'll find us there. We do post on occasion. They're pretty good posts, I have to say. Better than I could do. So go check that out.
Good job, Dave.
Lastly, we do have our patrons, our lovely patrons. Thank you guys for supporting us week in and week out. I know there's not like a huge amount of you, but the ones that do support us, we definitely appreciate you guys. Yeah, so big shout outs to Mallory Sutton, Ryan Everett, and Simon Webb. You guys are the realest. You keep us going. And if you'd like to donate to our cause or like help us out, this like help with our operating costs and things like that. This really helps us out a lot. Like if you want us to do more new games and things like that, this is where the money would be going so we can afford said new games, for either each of us or one of us, or what have you.
Given those three patrons, Simon, Mallory, and Ryan, I kind of wonder, we don't have to solve this right here, right now, because we're about to finish the episode. Also, enish the episode, which is what I was about to say. But there are three of them, which makes me think which one is the Triforce of Power and which one is the Triforce of Courage and which one is the Triforce of Wisdom. But I think we'll save that for another time. For now, I do want to direct everyone to the igcast.com, which is, of course, Kevin's lovely, beautiful website that he made with his own bare hands and keyboard and mouse and screen. You can find our ratings all there in a nice navigable chart format. We also have some shout outs to other people who we are honored to be affiliated with on that website. So definitely check out those pages as well.
Yeah. And lastly, if you haven't already, send us a review on, what do they call it? Apple Podcasts.
Oh,
or
yes.
Really any other place. But I guess that's where we look the most. But we definitely like to hear your thoughts on our show, how we could improve, or if we're doing a good job, what things of that nature. So be sure to write us a review there. I know we're asking a lot of you guys at this point, but if you feel so inclined to do that, then definitely do that.
Yeah, we appreciate it as always, guys.
And I guess we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your day or night, and love you too.
Love you too, guys.